The late Romantic era was the period of time typically considered to have started around 1850 that lasted until the early 1900s. It came directly after the Classical era and led into the modern and 20th century eras of music. During this time, the Industrial Revolution was in full effect, which not only served as an inspiration for composers of the time, but also led to the creation of better valves and keys for woodwinds and brass instruments. This allowed musicians to play with greater ease and greatly improved the reliability of instruments that relied on these pieces. The rise of nationalism also played a large role in music of the time. Many composers began to write music that displayed the pride they had for their countries, a freedom not many composers had in previous eras of music. This period was also home to many important historical figures and events. Charles Darwin released On the Origin of Species, which introduced what is now one of the most basic principles of biology. Sigmund Freud revolutionized our understanding of psychology. Henry Ford invented the assembly line. Edgar Allan Poe sparked the creation of the detective fiction genre. And Albert Einstein published his paper on the theory of relativity, which changed our understanding of the universe as a whole. Music during the Romantic era began to take a very different form than the music of earlier eras. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the Romantic era saw the rise of the middle class, and this meant that composers now had new audiences to perform for. Unlike composers from earlier eras who were almost entirely dependent upon the support of the wealthy, Romantic era composers now found themselves playing for larger audiences and middle-class citizens at public concerts and larger festivals. Because composers were less dependent on the support of a small group of wealthy aristocrats, music became more expressive and experimental. Romantic era composers tended to be less reliant on repetition and less concerned with tonality than their Classical era counterparts. It would often create dissonance through the use of chromatic scales and extensions of triads in order to better grasp the ear of their listeners. Larger orchestras were also quite common. Another result of the Industrial Revolution was the invention of several new instruments, such as the tuba, alto clarinet, contrabass clarinet, the saxophone, the euphonium, and the alto flute, which gave composers many new sounds to use in their music. Nationalism also played a large role in the music of the Romantic era. Composers would often write music with the intent to inspire pride in the listener's country, or music that described places in the composer's home country. Many composers also tried to move away from the highly rational mindset brought about during the Enlightenment era. Music of the time would often reflect a surrender to nature, strong belief in faith, or would focus more on the supernatural and the spooky. Romantic era art focused on embracing the exotic and unfamiliar, and would try and help the imagination envision and travel to strange new places. Many famous writers such as Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson, and Mark Twain existed during this time. One of the most famous artists of this time was Vincent van Gogh, whose painting, The Starry Night, is one of the most famous paintings ever made. Painted in 1889, the painting depicts the view of the sky through Van Gogh's window at night. The painting is a perfect example of the rough beauty and bold colors that Van Gogh was known for, and demonstrates how painters often depicted places in exotic fashions in order to let the observer's imagination wander as they observe the painting. One of the most famous composers of this time was Richard Wagner. Born on May 22, 1813 in Leipzig, Germany, Wagner is best known for his opera writing. Unlike most composers of the time, Wagner didn't simply write the music for his operas, he also wrote the librettos, which is the text used in long musical works that contain stage instructions and lines for the characters. He called this process Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art, in which he sought to synthesize the poetic, visual, musical, and dramatic arts. One of his works, The Rings of Nibelungen, is widely considered one of the greatest operas ever written. The opera is actually made up of 4 smaller operas, and Act 3 of the second opera begins with a song known as The Ride of the Valkyries, which is an iconic song still to this day. The second famous composer of the Romantic era was Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, born on May 7, 1840. Tchaikovsky was best known for the way he combined Russian and Western European music. Despite his success, Tchaikovsky spent much of his life suffering from severe depression. This is often attributed to the separation and then death of his mother at a very young age, the death of his close friend Nikolai Rubinstein, and his sexual orientation, though how great the effect this had in his life is still debated by musicologists. One of the most famous works of his is the Overture of 1812. Written in 1880, the piece is often used to accompany fireworks and is known for its dramatic cannon fire and brass parts.